Okay, so to create our database for our project, we're going to, for our online store, what we'll do is, first I just want to go over a little bit of a database, just concepts for databases being used by web servers. We could have an end user connecting through the internet that could possibly go to a router or could go directly to a web server. So a web server is any computer connected to the internet that has a program running saying, if anybody would like a web page from me, here it is. And it's constantly running and constantly looking for anybody who wants a web page from me. So a web server, for example, could be like Facebook. Actually, Facebook, because it's so big, has a collection of web servers. So when you go to connect to it, a router will find the one that is available and could answer your page request quickly. In our project earlier this semester, we were reading and we were recording data like what a person's name and password is. We were recording that in a file. I think we called the file database.txt. So that was just a file in our web server. But what we could do if our application starts getting really, really big and we can't maintain it all in a file called database.txt, we might want to have a real database, a collection of tables, and then our ability to query from those tables and get answers from those tables. And that database does not necessarily have to even be on the same web server machine. It could be on another part of the country. You could have the web server in New Jersey and the database could be out in California. And all we'd have to do is connect to our database cluster, which is we could have as many databases too in case one went down. We'd have a backup one. If we wanted to be really elaborate, we could do that. And then applications can go, without going through our web server and then connecting to our database, could go directly through the internet and connect to our database too. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the project as we have it right now. We have a web server and then a file on that web server where we record stuff. Now we're going to record stuff on a different machine. So, and it'll be a database server. So just like as I was saying before, a database server is something that is, anything that's a server is constantly looking for somebody trying to connect to it. And a database server, you would connect to it, and we'd have to have like a URL for the database server, and we'd have to have a password and a user ID, and you'd have to log in. And then once you log in, you can start asking questions to the database server, like, for this user ID, what is this person's password? And then it'll return the password to you. Okay, so we're going to use here on campus, we've been using this for a while. We've been using zurich2.monmouth.edu as our web server. And now we also have a database server on campus. It's in a different building also. And it's called mysql.monmouth.edu. So a couple of notes. A user using our database would need to connect to our web server. So they go through the internet to our web server. Our web server connects to the database. So the user doesn't really have to. The web server would then connect to the database. The user does not need to connect directly to the database server. If we decided to create an app that needs to read and write from it, then we would have to be able to connect directly to it. But right now, the web server is what's connecting to our database. Is what a user uses to connect to our database. They connect to the web server. So for our project, we're going to make this unbelievably simple, because this is not a database class. So if it was a database class, then we can make a more complicated database. But we're going to have, it's going to be made very simple. And because it's so simple, it's actually not going to function properly, but we don't care about that. We're going to have a users table, and the users table will have a UID. It's just common to call it, whatever the table is and an identifying number. We're going to put the email address of the person here. We're going to have a field called password. We're not going to encrypt the password, which is something we should do if we're doing a professional job on this. So anybody looking at this table can see everybody's password. And then we're going to record the first name and the last name of our users. Then we're going to have products, so you'll be able to upload products into this online store. So we're going to have a PID, which will be the key field for that table. Key field means it's a unique identifier. Anything that's in bold is considered a key for the field, meaning the field must be unique. And then we can put in a price, which could be an integer, a description, which could be words. A picture could be, we could upload a picture, or we could upload a URL to where a picture is somewhere out on the internet. And then we'll have a seller ID and a cart field. So the seller who posts the item, you would put your user ID or your email address, which would match something here, into the seller ID. The cart will be another user ID. If somebody wants to put that item in their cart, then they would put their email address in the cart field. Okay, and I'll get back to that in a second. It's going to be a huge problem in the fact that we made this so simple. And then anytime something's purchased, we're going to have a sales table. So we'll have a sales ID, the date, the product ID, the thing that was sold, the price it was sold at, who the buyer was and who the seller was. So for example, one problem with this design, because it's so simple, if somebody went shopping online and decided to put an item in their cart, the way we're doing it right now is they would just write there on this field, so these are columns in a table, so think of it like an Excel spreadsheet. They would just write their email address in the cart field, and now it's in their cart. While it's in their cart, if somebody else came along and said, I'd like to put this thing in my cart too, they would just write their email address here, and now that's out of the first person's cart and the second person's cart. So you wouldn't want to do that online if you were opening up a real store. But like I say, this is not a database design class. Does anyone off the top of their head, if you wanted to not have that happen, what would be involved? What's that? So let's say somebody wanted to put an item in their cart and they haven't bought it yet, then another person comes along and likes the item and says, yeah, put it in my cart. The way we're doing it here is whoever user ID is in the cart field, that's whose cart this item is in. So for example, if you put it in your cart and you were still shopping, and then I put it in my cart after you put it in your cart, it would now go from your cart to my cart.
What's going to end up happening is you probably have to create a button, so your checkout button.
Right.
What it will do is it'll perform some code that will go through your database and subtract whatever your initial quantity was from the quantity that the buyer was taking from it.
Okay.
And then if somebody else also had that in their cart,
Right.
and they clicked checkout, you would also have to perform a check to make sure that the initial quantity versus the quantity left
was enough to say.
Then they'd have to give you back an error.
Right. So just so we're not going to do this for this project, but what you're basically saying is, if somebody wants to put, so you might even want to have a quantity field. Like for every product, we might have a quantity of how many we have. And then if you put one in your cart, we could subtract one from the quantity, but then if later on you never buy the stuff that's in your cart, we could run a timer, and then if you leave your cart open for 12 hours, we dump everything out of your cart back into the store. So then we'd have to go back and then turn the quantity back up by one. So I mean, that would be what you'd really do if we wanted to do a real online store. But then that would add a lot more of the code, right? And actually, if you start it up, we might even want to have a separate table for carts. So we'd have a table that says your user ID, put this product in your cart, and we just keep adding products, and then after a certain amount of time, maybe we would clear out your cart. If you go to buy something, we would then do a check to see if the thing was available, if it's in your cart, and do we have that many still left in the store. We would allow you to buy it. But what I want to do here is, I want your web page to be able to just log in and issue, random database queries, so that you can pretty much just read and write on top of this data. So I mean, it's going to be like out of control. So don't worry if it works this way. It was kind of designed that way. It's so you could come into the database and read and write any field in any of these tables, which is going to make the thing, like I say, it's going to go crazy. One person could just say, put it in my cart, and then another person can come along and put it in their cart. So this is not going to have a lot of It's not going to be good logic to it, but you're going to get experience of logging, having your web page log into a database and just issue commands, changing fields all over the place. So, and then we could even make a recommendation for an improvement on the database design. So anyway, if you want to read and write from a database, you have to do that using this language called SQL, which stands for Structured Query Language. It was invented I think in the mid-'80s at IBM. And it's a popular way to talk to a database. So it can be used to add, delete, change, and query data in a database. So if you have a collection of tables created in a database and you want to talk to the table, you would say certain commands like this. For example, if you wanted to create a brand new table, we would issue a command that says create table. And I'm putting in bold letters, these are keywords in this language, SQL. And the other stuff could be, you could decide what to write. So we're going to say create table, the name of the table will be users. I'm going to say the UID is a variable character string of 30 characters and it must not equal null. So we don't want to have people in our database whose email address is null. I'm going to declare that the primary key is the user ID. So a primary key in a database basically means this field must be unique, and if I ever wanted to find a particular record, I can find it by the user ID. Then I'm going to say the password is 30 characters, the first name is 30 characters, and the last name is 30 characters. So that's just a maximum of how many characters they can be. So if I could somehow issue this command, if I logged into the database directly and had a screen where I could type in a command and hit enter, I could type this in. And it doesn't have to be on new lines like this. This could be one long line if you wanted to. It's just common to kind of write it this way so it's a little bit easier to read. Okay, so that would be the SQL statement, this sequential query, structured query language statement to create a brand new table. So then you'd have a table and it would be completely empty, but these would be the columns of it. So what else can we do with SQL? Suppose you wanted to retrieve a field that is in the SQL. This is something we're going to need to do. You can say, we'll skip this result equals right now. You could say select, and then you could list one or many fields. And you can even say star, meaning give me all the fields. So you could say select the password field. So remember, we have a couple of fields in this table. We have a user ID, a password, a first name, and a last name. So we have 4 columns in this table, but I'm only asking for the field that's in one of those 4 columns in this case. So I'm saying select the password field from the table users where the UID equals, and then you can give it anything you want. So it's going to say for this email address, tell me what the password is. And if this UID is unique, if it's required to be unique, then there can be at most one password. If not, then there might be many, and we might have to read through many answers. So we could get a password by issuing a statement like this. So now what you're going to have to do with your project, if someone goes to log in, they're going to type in a password. Right now what our project does is it takes the password they typed in, and then we open up the database.txt file and we read through all the passwords looking for a match. Now what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to ask the database, give me the password of this person. And then this person, the database will return that to you, and then you can compare those results. Okay, another SQL, this would be to add a brand new row to a database table. So if we already have a table called products, then we can use the SQL command. And again, like I say, this could all be one long line if you wanted to. I'm just writing it on new lines to make it a little more readable. So I could say insert into products. Now this part is actually optional. You can save the names of the fields, or you can just print out the values you want to go into them by using the values, open print, and then put the values. So if you wanted to, if you knew the order that the fields were in the table, you don't have to say what they are. But if you know which fields you want to put in, you could just say the field names, the column names, and then just say the price is 20, the description is it's a basketball, the picture is at HTTP, and then you could shoot somewhere out on the internet where a picture is. Here's the seller's ID, and the value for the cart is null. It's not in anybody's cart right now. So if you just issued this line from your web page, it would add an entry to this table. Okay. Let's see. So to make an update to an existing row, suppose there already is a row of data, but you want to change one of the fields. So you could say, update the products table. So this is not, you're not adding a new row to the database. You're taking an existing row but changing one of the fields in the row. So you could say, make an update to the products table, set the cart field equal to, and then you can make it equal to whatever you want. And only, so you don't want to do that for every product. You want to do that for maybe one product. You say where the product ID equals the number 234. So if you had 1,000 products, numbered 1 to 1,000, this line would take product 234 and change its cart field. Leave the other fields the same, and leave the whole rest of the table the same. But this would be a way to update one field in one of the tables. So for example, if you're going to have a button that says, if I hit this button, I want to add this product to my cart. When that button gets hit, you're going to want to issue this command. Okay? Now, this one is a little bit complicated. I didn't want this to be, complicated. I usually want, what I'd like to do is every button you hit on your web page will trigger one of these commands, but this one would have to trigger two. If you wanted to make a purchase of a product, two things have to happen. In our products table, because we have a list of all our products, we have to somehow mark the product as now being sold, somehow. And then we have this table called sales. Every time a sale is made, we want to be able to write a record to the sales table. So what we would do is, we could make an update to the products table. We could set the cart equal to some value like sold. And then we could say, and do it for a particular item, not for every item. And then we have to add an entry. We have to do an insert into the sales table. And then we say, okay, the date field, the product ID field, the price, the buyer, and the seller's field should be set with the values, whatever the date is, the product ID, the price, $20, the buyer, and the seller. And we would write that into the table. So here's a case where we're going to have one button that has to cause these two things to happen. Okay, so does it make sense that what we have to do, so now instead of reading and writing to a database.txt file and using that PHP code, open file, fopen, and then the file name and all that, so we can read and write from it, we're now just going to talk directly to a database. We're going to add records to the database. We're going to alter records that are in the database. We never really delete records. What we could have also done if we wanted to, we could have deleted this record. We'd say, well, if somebody's buying the thing, then we can get rid of it. It's no longer one of our products. Right? We could have done that. But then the problem was, if somebody wanted to return the product, we would go into the sales table and look, this person bought it from that person on this date, but we need to know what was it. And then we want to come back to the products table to see what it was that was sold. So it's a database design issue. We could have gotten rid of the item from the products once we sold it and recorded in the sold table, but then we probably want to have more fields in the sold table, just to remember what the product was. So just one side thing, with this design, if somebody marked a product as sold, and then after it was sold, a new person came along and put it in their cart, they can just put it in their cart. Because what I'm going to do with this project is, you're going to have we're all going to be sharing the same database, and you're going to have the freedom to read and write to any fields you want. Actually, you're going to have the freedom to delete the table too, so hopefully nobody does that. There is a command to delete a table, so hopefully none of you do that. But this will just show, it'll be an example where you have a lot of freedom to read and write from the tables. So if somebody bought a product, marked the cart as sold, and then someone else came along and just put their email address on it, that means it's in their cart again, even though the product's already been product could have been sold last week and now you're putting it in your cart again. Okay, so now the question is, how do we issue these commands from a web page? So, from inside of a web page, we have to somehow say, I would like my web page to first of all connect to the database. Then once it's connected to the database, then we can start issuing these commands. So we're going to have to do something like this. In our PHP page, so this is now text within a web page, we want to first of all connect to the database server. So there's a PHP command, a PHP function called mysql_connect. And in there it needs 3 things. It needs to know the URL of the database server. So that's a database server is a machine with a database on it that is saying, would anyone like to connect to me and ask me questions? So we're going to connect to the database server. In order to connect to it, unless it's completely unsecured data, there's usually a username and a password. You have that. So we want the database server, and I called it IT300 user, and then I called the password IT300 password. And this or die thing is basically a PHP thing that says if this doesn't work, then this whole web page will just end, and we'll spit out what the problem was. Like the database is not there, the password's no good. So that way we can kind of fix whatever the problem is. But if everything's working fine, we should be able to connect to the database. So now our web page is connected to the database. And now the next thing to do, once we're there, that database server may have, and actually once we even log into the database, that may have many, many databases on that server. So we have to decide which database we want to connect to. And I kind of picked a bad name for it. I called it IT300 user. I should have called it IT300 database. But the name of the database is IT300 user also. So once we logged into the server, now we're going to try to connect to the particular database where our online store is. And if we can connect to it, that's great. If not, it'll tell us why we can't connect to it. And then, once that's working, we can now use, so this is, using the mysql_select_db. That's a PHP command that says if you pass in a database name and you're already connected to a database, you'll go look up a database server, you could then go and connect to that database. Then, once we're connected to that particular database, we can then say, well, forget this results thing for a second. I could say MySQL query, and then open brace, and then in double quotes. I can then issue any SQL statement I want. So in this case, I'm saying select, and instead of listing out all the fields like user, UID, password, first and last, if you say star, it just means you want everything to come back. So I'm basically saying, give me everything from the users table. So this command, which we can now run from a web page because we have all this code in front of it. We're logging into the database server, we're connecting to the database, and then we're issuing an SQL statement for that database. Whatever the results is, which would be all our users, would get stored in this array called results. Then going further, we could read through the results and see what the results are. Okay. So what we can do, we'll cut and paste code like this into our web page so that it could work. So taking our project as it already exists, we used to go to a web page. Well, I shouldn't say we used to. This shouldn't look any different. So if I go to my So if you remember, the way our project was working was somebody can come to our page, and like I said, we should make this look nicer, but somebody can come to our page, and they can create a new account. They can type in, enter, you know, their email address, they type in their password twice, the first name and the last name, hit a create account button. We would take these answers from this form and send them to a page called, a PHP page called checknewaccount.php. We would take those answers and we would read through our file, database.txt, to see if this account has already been created. And if it has been created, we say, oh, this account already exists. If it hasn't been created, then we would write to that database. We'd write to that database.txt file. And then we were done. If somebody later on wanted to log in, they would type in their email and their password, and we would go read that file and see if it matched. And if it matched, we'd let them log in. So now what we want to do is have both of these forms connect to a database. So all of your projects will all connect to the same database. And the way we'll do that is our check, or our create new account code will look like this now. So it's going to be exactly the same. The beginning is exactly the same. The answers, the new email, the new password 1, the new password 2, new first, new last, that's going to be exactly the same. We'll do our checking variables, that's going to all be the same. What'll be new is the part where we go to write the variables to our database.txt file. Now what we're going to do is we're going to say we want to connect to a database that's somewhere out on the internet. It just so happens it's here on campus. So we need to know what the URL is for our database, so it's going to be mysql.monmouth.edu. We need a user ID because your web page is going to be logging into this common database, so we're going to use the IT300 user ID. The password is going to be IT300 password. And then the name of the database is going to be IT300 user also. I probably should have called that like password. I probably should have called that database, IT300 database. So then just going over what we talked about earlier, we're going to connect to the database by having a variable $DB connection. We can make up whatever we want. And then we're going to say MySQL_connect. We're going to pass in the required fields, which is the server name, the username, and the password. And if it doesn't work, we'll spit out an error why it's not working. Maybe the server's down, the database server's down. If all goes well, we then want to connect to a particular database on that, a particular database on that database server. So we say with this DB connection that we got, we want to connect to this database. $database name is equal to IT300. So now we'll be connected to that database. This then allows us to start issuing SQL statements. So we'll make a variable $SQL, and we'll say it equals select the user ID from the users table where the user ID equals whoever this person is. So the reason we had to do this is we want to make sure when we go to create a new account, we don't want to create an account for somebody who already exists. So at this point, we're checking to see if this person already exists. So this is just our SQL string, where we're saying select user ID from the users table where the user ID is the person who came in. So basically, if this person already exists, we're going to say, can you give me the user ID of this person and pass in the user ID, so it'll just come back to us. If the person doesn't exist, then nothing will come back. So then we have this, we have the results come back to a results field. And then we say $number equals, there's a function called MySQL_numRows, and that tells us how many rows came back to us. If we have one row, that means somebody was already in the table. And actually, I said if we have more, if for some reason we have many copies of this person, that should not happen. But if we have one or more answers come back, then we're going to send this person to the login page and say the problem is the user already exists. So this is something we had before. It's just now we're taking the answer from the database and coming up with the same reaction. If the table, the users, does not have this user account, the one that's trying to be created, which would be a good thing, then we can go ahead and create it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say MySQL query. At this point, I'm just typing in the text straight. I'm not I don't have a variable called $SQL and saying this is equal to it. So I'm just typing in the SQL statement, insert into the users table the values of the email, the password, the first name, and the last name. So now it's not very common in a production, at a company database that you would write straight SQL into a database, because this gives the user the opportunity to put stuff in the wrong place. But we can do it here because we know where these fields are. So the fields, the first field is the email, the second is the password, the third is the first name, and the fourth is the last name. If the table was changed, if for some reason the database administrator dropped the table and created a new table and put these fields in different places, this SQL statement wouldn't work. So I just wanted to point that out. Normally what we would do in a real database is, instead of issuing insert into, we would probably, the database administrator would give us a stored procedure that we could call, and it might be like called create user, and we would give it 4 fields. That function would then fill in the table with these 4 fields. And the reason we do that is because if the database administrator later added fields or added columns or removed columns, it wouldn't affect us because we wouldn't have to know the structure of the table. Here we're doing it where we have to know the structure of the table. So this would allow us to then insert the record into the field, assuming everything was okay, all the checks have been made, and we want to add this person. And then we close our connection to the database, because we don't want one web page to be open. Open up a connection to the database, and then 10 other people doing it too, and now we have 10 open connections. So once we're done, we close the connection. And then we send them to the account created, and we pass in the first name, so we could say, congratulations, Mary, your account's been created. And similarly, when someone goes to log in, the new thing now is, just like before, we pass in the email and the password. And then now what's different is we're going to be logging into the same database, and then we have our connection string, we have our SQL statement, which is select the password and the first name from the users table, where the user ID is the person who's trying to log in. So if you're trying to log in as somebody, then I'm going to ask the database, for your email address, what is your password and what is your first name? And then I'm going to take the number of rows that come back. Again, it's the same thing. There should be 1 or 0 records with that user ID. And I'm going to say if the number of rows is 1 or greater, that means I found something. I found some user. So I'm going to say, okay, found is correct. The password is whatever came back from the database, so I'm going to call that the database password, and the database first name, whatever comes back. Okay, now, if the password that the person entered equals the password that came from the database, then I'm going to say the password is valid, and I'm going to record their first name. And then I'm going to close the connection to the database. And then what happens further on down is, if the email wasn't found, we say the problem is the email's invalid. If the email was found but the password is no good, we go back to login and we say the password is wrong. And if the email was found and the password is good, then we send them to the welcome page and pass in their name, so it could say welcome, whatever your name is. Okay, once everyone's logged in, that takes us to our welcome.php page, which is right now blank. It just says welcome, whatever your name is. It doesn't do anything else. What we'd now like to add to that page is we'd like to be able to list a bunch of products that we're selling. We'd also like to have some forms on those pages so that you can upload a product that you want to sell. You could also, we want to have a form where you can also decide to add a product that's for sale into your cart, and also a third form that wants to purchase whatever in your cart. So what we'll do for our exercise is we're going to cut and paste this code into our welcome page. So this is, once again, now it's starting to become a routine, right? We basically keep having the same 4 variables. This helps us log into the database. We connect to the database. We pick a table in the database. And now what this is going to do is it's going to spit out an HTML table. So it creates an HTML table. And then when we go down a little bit further, our SQL statement that we're issuing against the database is select star, that means everything, all the columns, from the products table. So we're just going to select every product that's in our products table. And then when we get our results, we know how many results we get, which is our number variable. And then we just go through all the products, and we just keep adding entries to our table. So this is going to look very ugly. It's a table, like an HTML table with columns. If you wanted to buy stuff on the internet, they don't print out all the products in tables. They use a style sheet so that all the products have a nice, picture and a nice price and different colors for those areas. So again, this will look a little crude, and we could later on make it look prettier if we wanted to. But what we're basically just going through, for every product in our products table, we're just adding another row into our table. Into our table that'll appear on this screen. And then once that's done, then what we're going to do is we'll create a form. We're going to create a form right below all the list of all the products, and we're going to have a text field. So it's a couple of questions. The text field is going to be the buyer's email, and we'll set the ID to cart ID with capital ID. The text field for the product ID will be set to PID. The ID field will be set to PID, and then we'll add a button called the cart button. And then the action for this form will be, we'll make a file called add to cart.php. And then all you have to do is cut and paste, click this link and cut and paste this. So what this really does is if somebody wants to create, it'll look like this when you're done. Let me go to my welcome page. So this is a crude version of it. So the first thing is going to be, this is our welcome page. Now we're going to have a table. It's going to have product IDs, descriptions, pictures, a price, and who the seller is. And then at the bottom of that, we're going to have a form. Right here is a form where we're going to say, this will give you an opportunity to take any product we have and add it to your cart. So you would type in your email address and you type in the product ID here, and then hit the add to cart button. So the action of this button will be go to add to cart.php. Then we'll have another form where you can check out your cart. So the next form would be a form, but right below the add to cart form, right below that, we'll add another form that has, you list the buyer's user ID. So we'll say ID equals buyer ID. Then we have a button, and the button we'll call the buy button. And then the action for this form will be to send this information to a file called checkout.php. So that would mean that this page, this button, so really all those instructions are saying is create a form that asks for an email, call this field the buyer ID, call this the product ID, oh, I'm sorry, this one. Enter your email, call this one the buyer ID, and then just have this form send its answer. There's only one answer. Oh, yeah, so this would be, you would type in your buyer's ID and then hit this button. And we'll just go through the whole table. Anything that is in the cart for that person will become purchased for that person. And then the last one is a form where you can upload a product that you want to sell. So if you wanted to upload something, you would want to put the price in, you give a description, I should make this field longer, a picture URL, so you could put a picture on the internet and then say here's where it's located. You put in your ID because you want to sell it, and then you hit this button. So the last form, the instructions for the form are below the checkout form, add a separate form that does the following. It has a text field for the price, so you say ID equals price. A text field for the description, you say ID equals description. A text field for the picture and label it picture URL, and then set the ID to picture. So do you guys remember the ID? When you're creating a form, it asks you for an ID and it asks you for a label. So the ID is what you're going to send the answers to another file with, and the label is what the person will see when they're looking at the file. So they, these are no big deals, just setting the ID. And then we want to create a button. We'll say the ID is the offer button. And then we want the results of this form to go to, the action to be go to offerproduct.php. And then you'll make a copy of the offer product thing, and then you'll have that file. So when it's finally done, you can look at the products we have. The pictures aren't showing up for some reason. But you can look at the products we have. You can say, oh, I want product 4. So you put a 4 here. Oh, you say you put your email address here, you put a 4 here, and you hit this button. And what does that do? It puts product 4 in your cart. Now, how's it doing that? Like I said, we made a very, very quick and dirty database design. We have a cart field for every product, and then we just write the email address of the person who wants to buy it. If you decide later on you want to buy all the stuff in your cart, you type in your email address here and hit checkout. Anything in your cart will be sold to you. And then, if you decide you want to put up an item for sale, you just fill in these 4 fields and hit this button, and then it'll show up to everybody that it's up for sale. Okay, so we can create the forms. So the part about getting the project to all work together is if you go to the class page, the project 4.2 part, or part 2, project 4, part 2. So first of all, we're swapping out the code that we used on project 4, part 1, where we check the login and we check the new account. These used to, this code used to read and write from a file called database.txt. Now what we're doing is we're receiving the same 2 inputs, the email and the password, but instead what we're doing is we're logging into a common database. So we're logging into a MySQL database, so we need the database server, the database user, the database password. We log in, we make a connection to the particular database we want, and then what we're doing now, instead of reading from the file and saying, look for this person and see if that password is correct, we're issuing the SQL statement, select password, comma, and the first name. So the users table has 4 fields: the UID, the password, the first, and the last. So we're only interested in the password and the first name. Why do we want the first name? Because if the password matches, we want to say welcome, whatever your first name is. So we'll ask for the password and the first name from the users table. And then using this MySQL query, we can submit the question to the database which we've already logged into. So then it comes back and we read through the answer. If something comes back, that means this user exists. If nothing comes back, that means the user doesn't exist. So we would give an error message saying the user doesn't exist. And the same thing is true for the check new accounts. Again, we're swapping out the code that reads and writes from the database.txt file and instead writing from our MySQL database, which all the students in the class share. So now the new thing we want to add is when we go to our welcome page, the welcome page is now going to be our online store. So it'll be kind of like a cheap version of eBay, where you can post products onto the page that your classmates will see, and you can buy things that are on the page. So we want to add a few forms. So we'll have a form where a buyer can add their email address. I'm sorry, a text field for the buyer's email address set to cart ID. So what we can do here is we can upload products. So the code we're going to use, well, first of all, we'll create a form which has an ID of cart ID and another field with an ID of PID for the product ID, another question for the cart button, and then we make the form's action go add to cart.php, and what code goes into that file, you just click on this code, this button, and you get the code. So what the code is doing is just saying, if I give you a cart and a product, I want to mark that product as being in this cart. So, again, we log into the database, connect to the database, and we end up issuing this the MySQL command, update the products table, set the card field to whatever login we have, where the product equals whatever the product ID is. So, for example, let me bring up what the project will what the page will look like. I'll go to my welcome page. So when I get to my store, go to store. It looks. Oh, I guess some of you have added stuff. Okay. So some of the students have added stuff. So we'll just get to it in a second, how to get the pictures to it here. But for example, product number 8, which is a dinner for 2, and then here's a picture, which costs $20, was posted by the owner of Jacks.com. Okay. So what this form is going to do is if somebody says product number 8, my login is whatever my login is, add to cart, and hits the add to cart button, this field will change and become whatever your login is. So really what we're doing, it's a very cheap way of putting something in your cart. We're basically saying in the products table, mark the cart field with my name. So the way this was designed, if somebody came right after you and said, no, put it in my cart, it's kind of like they're taking it out of your cart and putting it in their cart. So that's what ends up happening with this code. Then we want another form if you want to check out. So if you want to check out, that's basically saying take all the things that are currently in my cart and mark them as sold by me. So what would then happen, actually I created this tool called the Database Administrator tool. So we can see everything in all the tables. These are all the people who have created an account. These are all the products. And these are all the sales. So anytime you check out a cart, we're going to put a record in the sales saying on this date, this product was bought at this price by this person, sold from this person. And just keep adding records to that. So another thing about the weak design of this database is if I buy a product, you can come by tomorrow and buy it again. Because I'm just keeping a log of everything that's bought. I'm not removing the product from the products thing, so you can just keep buying products. We would want to add code that says if this thing's already been sold, nobody new should be able to buy it. Okay, so back to, so we need a checkout.php. So we'll need a form that has a field called a buy button. I'm sorry, we'll need a form that has an ID called buyer ID, and we'll need a buy button. And just by hitting that button, you don't have to say anything else because you've already put stuff in your cart. The code that's in this checkout thing will just take your login and go through the whole table of products, and anything where your cart is marked with your login, that will be marked in the sales table as sold. So the code looks like this. We receive a buyer ID, so we save the buyer ID. Once again, log into the database, connect the database server, connect to the database, and the SQL line we're going to submit here is select the product, the price, the seller ID from the products table where the cart field equals whatever my name is. So that's going to return all the records in the products table that are currently in my cart, meaning the cart field is set to my name. Then I'm going to take those results and write those results into sales table. Right, I'm going to write into, I'm going to insert, so insert is the SQL statement for adding a new record to a table, not modifying an existing one. Updating is when you're modifying an existing one. So I'm going to write into the sales table, I'm going to write today's date, and we did that when we created our blog. I go out to PHP and I get today's date. I say on this date, this product at this price, here's the buyer, here's the seller, and I put the values values are date, the PID. So this ends up being the date, the values that we're going to store are going to be the date which we get from the system clock, the PID which came from the products table, the price which came from the products table, the buyer's ID which was entered by the form, and the seller's ID which we got out of the products table. And we're going to write all those fields into the sales table. Then what we also want to do is we want to mark the cart field as sold. So that way we know this product is sold. Unfortunately, if someone else comes along after it's been sold and says, put it in my cart, right now we put it in the cart. The code doesn't say, well, if it's sold, then you can't put it in your cart. Okay? And then the last thing is if you want to post a product. So what you do is we have a form where you can give a price, a description, a URL for a picture. So what that means is we're not storing the picture. You put the picture somewhere on the internet and then just tell us where it is, like http:// wherever it is. And then we will display, assuming you typed in the URL correctly, we'll display the picture. Then we have a seller ID field, because you're selling the product, so you have to tell us who you are. And then a button. As soon as you hit the button, we run the offer product code. So the offer product code would do what? It takes the price, the description, the picture, and the seller ID that you've given it, logs into the database, connects to the database, and then does insert into products, the price, description, picture, and seller ID, and the cart field. And we give the values of, let me scroll this up. We give the values of, oh, this I should take out, this is what I was testing. We give the values of whatever you gave us as the price, the description, the picture, and the seller ID. And for the cart, I put in null, meaning it's blank. And then that's how we put that in. Actually, I should take this line out. Oh no, I'll change that later. Okay. So once you do that, the way it should work is like this. If I go to the online, if I go to my store, to add something, I would go like this. So again, right now we don't have our login thing working, which means, in other words, we don't save the when you log in, we don't save your address in a cookie. So that's why we have to keep asking, who are you? So we'd like to, in a later step of this project, remove this. So if you've already logged in and you want to offer a product, you shouldn't have to tell who you are. You're already logged in, so we should know who you are. But right now you have to say that. So if I wanted to offer a product, I can say, I could make a price, like $50, and a description, I could say, let's say hockey tickets. And so who the Rangers play now? Is anyone following hockey?
Yeah, Capitals.
Capitals?
8 to 7:30.
Tonight?
Yeah.
No, okay, so I've got to hurry up then. Now, where did I put the picture? I have a picture of hockey tickets. It's on my, where did I put it? I put it in my store under images, I called it Devil's Tips. All right, well, no one needs to know that. So, I'll call it http:// sort2.monmouth.edu/my login/IT300 store/images /devils tics.jpg, and the seller ID, like right now I can put anything I want, so I'll just leave it. Okay, so if I submit this, I'm make sure I got the devil's tics.jpg images store. Okay, I think I got this right. So I just submitted it, and I must have spelled the URL wrong, because the picture's not showing up. Okay, so just one thing. So what I just entered this one. So it's hockey, Rangers capital ticket. I got the picture wrong, so I must have typed something wrong. $50 on the seller, and it's currently in stock. Anything that gets updated for the first time, the card field is set to null, and then I have our code saying if the card field is set to null, it's saying in stock. Now, one thing I did, this database administration tool. The database, so for example, if your picture's not showing up, it means you did what I just did, and typed in the URL wrong. So if you go to the instructions, I added this database administrative tool right here, this database administrator tool, and I added a box. So first of all, if there's anything you add to these tables you want to get rid of, you can pick one of the tables, and then based on the key field, you can delete it. So for example, if I wanted to get rid of, let's say I wanted to get rid of this first basketball. If I wanted to get rid of this first basketball, I know this is in the products table, so I could just say from the products table, remove number 9, and it'll be gone. So this tool is a little bit dangerous because you guys could all start deleting your classmates' entries, but I could say from products, get rid of number 9, and hit the delete record, and now it's gone. It's gone from everybody. So the first field is the user ID. So if you want to get rid of anything, you can just say get rid of, from the users table, pick what's in the first column, and then just hit that button. It'll get rid of it. Now, if you want to make an update, I opened up this SQL statement. You could type in any SQL statement here and hit this button, and it'll be issued against our database. So I made a mistake in my picture, obviously, because my picture's not coming up. So I'd like to make an update to the database. So the SQL command, and I'll go through this example. I want to make an update to the products table where the PID equals 12. And then I want to change one of the fields. So the command I want to issue is this. What is the SQL command for update? It's update the table name. Let me go to Google. I forget already how to do an update. So SQL update. The SQL update command goes like this. Update table name, set, column equals a value where some other field equals something. So it goes like this. Update products, set picture equal to HTTP. Oh, this is the thing I typed wrong. Sorry. 2.mono.edu/tilde. PID equals 12. So this SQL command should update the table to update the picture. So the thing I'm trying to fix, and hopefully this works, the thing I'm trying to fix is this. I must have put the picture in wrong, so whatever I typed in as the URL goes off to the internet and there's no picture there. So that's why I'm getting a broken picture. So I'm hoping if I issue this command, the picture will show up. So I'll hit submit, and if I typed it in correctly this time, it should show up. Okay, so I typed it in right this time. So what I did, so basically in that open box where you can just start issuing SQL commands, really any command that we can do, any SQL command you can do, you can type into that box and hit enter and it'll be done on this table. I did put in that code that if you put the word drop or delete, drop will get rid of an entire table, so I don't let those go through because I don't want somebody accidentally or maliciously typing in drop products, then all the products will be gone. So you can't do drops or deletes. Deletes will delete individual rows, and that you'd have to use the command up top. Okay, so what we can do now is we'll take a break and then log back, we'll log back in and see if we can put products